Again, I'm from Wing, North Dakota, which is 45 miles northeast of Bismarck. Wing is population 185, and I was born and raised there. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the progression that took place on our ranch. It is specific to us. I always tell everybody that up front, but I want to make that clear to everybody and to be specific. I ranched there. This is a recent family photo, actually, with my wife, Jody, my father, Darrel, Sr., and my 4-year-old daughter, Audrey, who has got quite an emphasis throughout the presentation. And as I stated earlier, I'm a German from Russian descent. My wife is Irish. Some would say our children probably don't have a chance with that blend, but we would beg to differ. I am the 4th generation on the ranch, actually the 3rd generation where we sit now. My great-grandfather actually homesteaded around the Wing area in the early 1900s. In 2006, you know, we call ourselves ranchers, and what we did is we figured out ranching is turning free solar energy into wealth by managing grazing animals. And we sat down and we decided that we needed to make some changes because that was how we were going to try to improve. And it wasn't that we were in a stalemate. We weren't going horribly backwards at what we were doing. We always considered ourselves good stewards. We did season-long graze, but we always thought that we were good to the resource. Before 2006, we had limited annual cropping, if at any. We had some CRP ground. We were conventionally farming in the 70s and 80s until I was in college. And we knew that that wasn't working for us the way that we wanted to. And in our area, in the Prairie Pothole region, with hill and dale and lots of rocks and that type of thing, it just wasn't working for us, and we completely went away from annual cropping. Good, bad, or otherwise, that's kind of our story. But we sat down and we came to some conclusions, and the first thing that we needed to do is we needed to identify the resource concerns on our ranch. And that's the hard reality of it all, and I can reiterate this over and over again, that that's what you generally, or you do have to do, you know, if you're going to make this progression. Obviously, the grazing system lacked enough pastures to have adequate rest and recovery. We had predominantly, we run 4 pastures, and we had 2 herds. And there again, we worked hard on the resource, but we just weren't making it happen. Our hay fields had become predominantly a monoculture of smooth brome. We had stopped annually cropping. Our hayland production had diminished to the point that if it didn't rain heavy and those fields that weren't close to home that we didn't pour the manure onto, and we even went so far as to putting commercial fertilizer on our hayland, that we just weren't cutting it and trying to get the forage that we needed to feed our livestock. And our grazing land was trending in that way as well. And like I mentioned, annual cropping had become a thing of the past for us. We just wouldn't do it. We set aside some goals that we wanted to do. We wanted to increase the amount of forage we produce while always keeping an emphasis on soil health. And that's the basis of everything that we think about now is soil health. We wanted to build flexibility into our management of resources. So we could hay and graze, we could graze longer, graze shorter, defer hay, all kinds of different management things. Obviously, we wanted to create a financially sustainable operation. We wanted to make it better, more profitable. And to be quite honest with you, and I can talk a long time on this, we wanted to start having more fun farming and ranching. It had really become a drag. And it seemed like all we were doing is working. We were treating symptoms all the time. We had the resources to treat a lot of those symptoms because obviously I work in town for the soil district, so I had cash flow. And so we had lost kind of the fun and the familyness that we needed, that I knew that we needed in the farm and ranch. This is just a quick overview of before, and this is actually our home unit, and this talk specifically relates to the home unit. You can see that we had, 4 or 5 pastures, we had some hayland fields, we had some expiring CRP that came out in 2007, we had some yet that actually is going to come out in 2012. That I'll talk a little bit about that. And this is just a general concept of what we were doing before. We went ahead and we started building the system. And we concentrated on our grazing system predominantly and along with our cropping system, but more so probably on the grazing end because that's what we were familiar with and that's what we like to do. We started putting cross fencing in to increase the recovery time. We knew that we had to do that. We had to implement more rest into our grazing system. And so I would say we probably put in anywhere from 25,000 to 30,000 feet of cross fencing. We installed pipelines to put more water spots in. We probably put in 10,000 foot, 7,000 to 8,000 foot, more like it, probably a pipeline. We added our expired CRP for additional grazing. We started using cover crops to extend the grazing season. We used cover crops to enhance soil health when we were converting some of that expired CRP into hayland. And we started integrating winter grazing when the conditions would allow. We moved our calving gate to work with nature. Now this is probably one of the biggest things that happened on our ranch, and I would put it probably in the top 3 things that occurred. We had predominantly calved in latter March, early April for years and generations, and we kind of up and decided that if we were going to make this thing work, we were going to have to calve with Mother Nature. And so we started moving our calving gate. We now calve in from about the 5th of May until the latter part of June, which has made our life unequivocally better, because it's just, I can't really stress that enough. We took a holistic approach to our management. And I will say this, my wife Jody, who, her and I actually recently attended a holistic resource management class. It's probably the best thing that we ever did. And I was going along for a few years and we were starting to implement some of these things. And she'd always have questions, and you know how it is sometimes between spouses. And I would try to explain it to her, but she didn't quite get the gist. Well, we went to the class together, and now it's starting to become totally different. It wasn't that she wasn't always on board. It's that she didn't know. Why was I putting these cover crops in? Why was I out late at night working, building fence? Why was I doing, spending the money on the pipelines and the water tanks to do this? So that was a big step for us. And obviously, we're learning all the time. We're a work in progress. I think that happens with everybody, and we do make some mistakes, but they're not the end of the world type mistakes. And we can overcome them. And, you know, we learn from every mistake that we make. This is just a little diagram of what we had when we started. Obviously, we had 0 tame pastures. When I talk tame pastures, I talk predominantly grown pastures with some alfalfa. And we had 4 native pastures. What we see today is we have 10 tame grass pastures, and we're up to 23 native pastures. And one of the nice things that I've figured out here kind of recently and on the way too is I have all the infrastructure in place. I can actually use temporary cable now and push in posts. And these pastures, my tame grass pastures range in anywhere from 28 acres to 40. And so I can cut them in half, I can do whatever. Using this cable and these reels and these pushing posts. My 23 native pastures are anywhere from 17 acres to about 35 acres. Is the largest one. And I can now divide them up any way that I like. And of course, any time that you can divide something, you increase the rest and recover. Why cover crops? Obviously, as I stated earlier, to address the resource concerns. When using cover crops, you can reduce erosion. You can increase soil organic matter, which was a big one for us. The areas that we put cover crops on in the beginning had been predominantly a monoculture of smooth grown for over 37 years. And so our organic matter had dropped to the point because we went in there and paid it off every year. Whether it was drouthy, whether it was a good stand, whatever it was, we took it off. And that led to organic matter depletion. We didn't have any much excess nutrients, although I figured that we had some really deep nutrients on some of the fields because we hauled manure on those fields consistently year after year. Promote biological nitrogen fixation. Increase biodiversity. We didn't have any biodiversity. Our land was dead. Our hay land was dead. It was a monoculture. There wasn't any diversity there. We didn't have generally too much of a weed and disease problem because it was predominantly grass, but we did have a few weeds and we always sprayed them. There again, treating a symptom instead of the problem. Cover crops provide supplemental forage, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Soil moisture management. When it was drouthy, those hay fields produced nothing. And obviously improved infiltration. We didn't have any infiltration either because it just run off. Another way of looking at addressing some resource concerns over here is predominantly a lot of the crops that we use in our cover crops when we're renovating hayland or expiring CRP. A component of 3 different legumes. Always trying to put carbon on. The millet, obviously, is a benefit for wildlife, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Radish and turnip, always a staple of our cover crops, no matter where we're at in Burley County. Sunflower, taking care of the wildlife. Pollinators. Talk a little bit about pollinators, and I'm just starting to find out more and more about those. Obviously, the deep roots, trying to increase infiltration. What are cover crops? Just kind of what I described up there. They're legumes, warm season grasses and broadleaves, cool season grasses and broadleaves. And they've got taproots and fiber root crops. Crop diversity. This is what we're now trying to get into our annual cropping system, is crop diversity. There again, we don't have a rotation. We don't need a rotation. We take care of the soil health, it takes care of us. But these are some of the things that we use some of these in our cover crop mixes. These are your examples of cool season grass. These are your examples of cool season broadleaves. I won't read them off to you. But crop diversity is the key, one of the keys. Warm season broadleaves. And warm season grasses. Benefits. What are the benefits that we've seen from cover crops? Obviously, we've increased our infiltration. We've got radish and turnips, all different types of rooting depths. We've increased our infiltration. We've increased our organic matter. We went from probably having about 2.5% in 2007 or 6, and we're pushing 5%. Now that is a dramatic increase, and I can't really explain that, but that's just the way it is. The numbers prove it. We've enhanced our nutrient cycling. Actually, sometimes too much, and I'll give you some examples of that. Our crop diversity now has exploded. We went from having a smooth row monoculture with one thing to putting these cover crops in, which probably can have anywhere from 8 to 12 things in. And so our diversity is increased. And again, we've increased our pollinator habitat, which has a lot of benefits all on its own. Infiltration. Just some photos of the roots. These are some turnips, some radish. I think that's a alfalfa root. The different root types that are in cover crops. Fibrous and tap roots. Obviously, if you have infiltration troubles, you're going to want to get into this. They're shallow, they're intermediate, they're deep. Cocktails allow varying rooting depth. Just some examples of what we've used. Winter triticale is a fibrous root. Sweet clover has a deep tap root. Red clover, Austrian winter pea and hairy vetch are shallow fibrous roots. Infiltration, this is an example of the infiltration problems that we had. You can see that this took a hard left, and then it started to head back down. Why did it take a hard left? It was a tillage layer from over 40 years ago. This came off a field that was, I said, that was grass for 37 consecutive years, but it's still there. Cover crops help break through this infiltration problem that we had. Tillage reduced restrictive layers, that's what I was talking about. We tilled and conventionally farmed decades before that, and we were still seeing the effects of it. Soil is protected now from wind and water erosion. Evaporation is reduced. This is armor and cover on the soil. This is a cover crop that I grazed this fall. Actually, it's this winter. I've made mistakes with this in the past. I've actually taken too much off. But I think this year, I kind of hit it. And I'm not going to say that I'm going to hit it every year, but this is kind of the cover that I like to see. Evaporation is reduced. And I've got a slide in there that talks about that. This talks a little bit about soil temperature. Obviously, 130 degrees, you lose 100% of your moisture through evaporation and transpiration. Guess when you can lose 100% of your moisture? It's when you got bare ground. At 100 degrees, 15% of the moisture is used for growth, and 85% is lost through the evaporation and transpiration. At 70 degrees, 100% moisture is used for growth. So there's your water. and obviously at 140 they start to die. And we know this because we use a lot of compost and compost teas at our Minokan farm. Josh referenced that. It's an acreage that we have east of Bismarck, the soil district has, and we build our compost and we try to keep it the right temperature. If we let it get hotter than 140 degrees, it's failing. And so that means that then we have to go in and turn it. Soil organic matter, what can it do for you? Obviously, it can increase your water holding capacity, improve moisture efficiency, food source for soil microbes, lessens compaction, and good for carbon sequestration. Excuse me, it's easy for me to say. Like I said, we went from having about 2.5 to 3% organic matter to close to 5 in a short period of time. The photo in here is just our herd of cows grazing these cover crops. Here's another example of soil organic matter. 1% organic matter equals 10,000 pounds of carbon, which is 1,000 pounds of nitrogen, 1,000 pounds or 100 pounds of phosphorus, and 100 pounds of sulfur. If it mineralizes at a rate of 2 to 3% from organic N, which we can't use for inorganic N, our result is we're getting 20 to 30% of usable N per acre. Now, if I've got 2.5% organic matter, or 5%, it's going to make a big difference. 2.5% is pretty good, but look what I can get. That's a vivid, stark example. You've probably seen this one. I think Josh showed this one. Soil organic matter and available water capacity. If we're at 5, and I'm in a silty clay loam, because there's a lot of clay where we're at, or I'm at a 2, I'm gaining 1.2 inches of water. That can help when it's dry and droughty. Cover crops provide a continually live root to harvest additional sunlight. That's the basis of it all. It's the concept of having something live growing there all the time. If we don't have anything live growing there, obviously we're not going to be able to harvest the sunlight. Nutrient cycling. We can fix nitrogen with the legumes in the cover crops. The cover crops scavenge for N, the turnips, the radish, the sunflowers. And we get to see some crop response generally after following the cover crop. Nutrient cycling, this is some of the ratios between carbon and nitrogen ratios, the bacteria and stuff in the soil, what alfalfa is, obviously what wood is, protozoa, another ingredient in soil. Imbalance leads to slow breakdown of residue or breakdown occurring too quickly. I put this slide up here because I think there is somewhat of an imbalance, and I wasn't aware of it. I also put this cover crop was grazed too long, resulting in not enough armor. What happened is I think I took off too much of the armor, the cover. And what was happening, and I was watching it somewhat materialize, is that the material was breaking down. I thought I had left enough there, and then by the time I got back and started, when I was monitoring it and looking at it, it was breaking down and going back into the soil. So I made a mistake. I should have probably left more armor on. And that's kind of the point of this. Replacing the surface residue, again, out of the Kenny Miller world. always have something growing, always have cover. This is an oak pea that we harvested, and in a portion of this field, we put cover crop on some of it, where we put winter triticale and hairy vetch, and we no-till seeded it to replace the crop that was harvested off. I went in there then shortly and I fenced it off, and we put about 175 pairs in it for about 2 days to stimulate growth and add the biology to it. And I don't know how much growth stimulation it did, but it did add the biology. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we've made in annual cropping in cash grain farmers is they've taken the livestock off the land. So anytime that we can add livestock to our annual cropping system, we think it's a plus. This shows the predominant cover crop mix, what we use on our ranch, and what we seed per acre. We use cowpea, soybean, and sunflower, which are all warm season broadleaf. Proso millet, which is a warm season grass. Sweet clover, radish, and turnip, which are cool season broadleaf. But we don't put any cool season grass in. Why? Because we had that for so many years. Our place was covered with cool season grasses. So that's why we tend to leave it out of our cover crop mix. Diversity in the cropping system. This is where we're headed with our cropping system. There again, you ask about rotations. We really have no rotation. But we try to get all these different broad, cool season grasses, warm season grasses, warm season broadleaves, cool season broadleaves, into the cropping system. We mimic nature. Native rangeland has plant diversity. We try to resemble our annual cropping much the same way we do our native rangeland. Native rangeland, I don't know the exact figure, but it may have as many as upwards of 250 to 300, maybe Tim would know better, species.
Is that a musk thistle on the top right-hand corner?
This one?
Right-hand corner, there.
No, it's a purple curry.
Oh, okay.
Clover. But this is what we try to mimic. Getting back to cover crops, the cover crop we seed depends on the resource concerns that we have. It goes back to the very beginning. We identify our resource concerns and we move on from there. I threw this slide in here. This is some cover crop seeding date guidelines for what we use in Burley County. And we have our different kinds of mixes, obviously. We use cool season species, warm season species, and then maybe back to cool season species, but these are the dates that we use. And they're just a guideline that we use. And you'll have to probably establish your own guidelines for this area. Cover crops are a wildlife haven. This is, I believe, 2008's cover crop. And you can see the diversity. We just have a huge component of deer and stuff that are just terribly attracted to this. Grouse, pheasants. It just brings them in. And we're 3/4 of a mile from town as the crow flies, and we probably got more wildlife than, if you were out in the grouse. So another great benefit of cover crops, obviously, is it's a wildlife attraction. Enhancing pollinators. I'm just starting to learn more and more about pollinators, but I know that they are a beneficial in the circle of it all. And when you walk out into these cover crop mixes that have sunflowers, this is 2 pounds of sunflower in this cover crop mix. It's alive. It's buzzing with insects, bees. And I'm not a bug guy, but you can hear, you can feel, you can live, you can see the biology in the life. 6 years ago when I walked across that after we cut it as one of our hay fields, it was dead. It even stunk. I'm going to mention a little bit about, there probably is some CRP coming out in this area and at home. We've run into some same issues. You know, how to take it out, what's the best way. I'm going to throw these out here. This is as an example. Obviously, we want to preserve the soil structure. Most of our hayland and all of the CRP that we took out and put back into annual crop production or in the process of converting it to hayland, we did this way. CRP probably isn't the most beneficial thing for the soil that's came along in the history of the world, but it did have some benefits. You did preserve some soil structure, you built some organic matter, you got some litter, and then you go in there and you run a big disc through it or plow it. You've just destroyed 10 or 20 years of work, however long it was in. And so we went along, and there was an individual that actually was from Tuttle, which was 15 miles east of Wing and to the north, and he developed these, he actually developed these land levelers to increase hay production on, you know, predominantly alfalfa fields and alfalfa grown fields. But we use it, and of course, preserving the soil structure is number one key. The soil profile is not disturbed. This is what it looks like. We just threw these in last night. He calls it the pocket gopher thing, obviously. And it's a moldboard blade on the front with a huge roller. And we've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres with it. We've done some acres over, you know, and over. But it really is a good concept. And this afternoon we'll go through some case studies and we'll talk a little bit how we have a cash grain farmer who is a SCD supervisor in our county, that he actually went and did it a different way. But the common denominator is the same. The goal is to preserve the soil structure. So that's what that is. This guy is since deceased that originally built these. His son has actually taken over. They are agricultural producers in Kidder County, and they do have these. Yet they don't actually make them anymore. They built enough of them and they rent them out. That's what they do now. I'm going to take you through the progression of the cover crops that we've used since 2006, and we'll kind of wrap up with that. I think everybody's getting hungry, including myself. I don't know, we must be past time, right? We're fine. Talked earlier about making some mistakes along the way. This is my first attempt at cover crops back in 2006. It kind of looks like a wreck, don't it? This actually was a field of CRP from 1989, I believe, to 2000. Well, it had to be an even. Now, it must have only been CRP for 10 years. We went in and land leveled this, and we seeded this. 2006 was extremely dry. in North Dakota. I was rather disappointed, to say the least. I had other plans. You know, we just kind of gotten back into annual cropping and we were giving cover crops a try, and this is what comes. A bit disheartening, but I believed in cover crops because I had seen what other guys were doing. But here's the funny thing that happened, and this is due to my lack of management or time restraints. I let that field come back just on its own. I was actually going to burn it down in the spring and seed like oats for hay or something in it. But I let it come back. And this is the crop response that came back of just grass and alfalfa. We had hayed that previous field. We got less than a bale an acre when we hayed that. We seeded that cover crop, which was a failure, or it looked like a failure. We did nothing. We let this come back, the crop response, we got 3.5 bales to the acre off of this.
What was the time difference between
Pardon?
what was the time difference between your failure and then your after effect here?
This was seeded about the end of May in 2006. This picture was taken in the fall.
Okay.
This picture was taken before we cut it for hay, probably in latter June. Or 07, yes. So I knew there was something up. I couldn't explain it, but something happened. Cover crop 2007 after paying off. This is another field south of the place. This is the field that was predominantly grown for 40 plus years. We hayed it off. We finally had enough. Another bale to the acre, bale and a half. We even had manure on this. We seeded this cover crop. We hayed it early that year, probably in mid-June, late June, which is early for us. But this is what started to come. Finally, we were supplying the soil biology with a food and a home. The diversity. We couldn't hardly believe it. Cover crops can accelerate biological time. That's a very important point. I mentioned about the organic matter increase. I took a field that was a monoculture, smooth grown for close to 40 years or over 40 years, and I used cover crops, and I increased and accelerated the biological time. That field still got a long ways to go, in my mind. We got a long ways to go. But with cover crops, you can do that. You can right a lot of wrongs in a shorter period of time. If we would have kept no-tilling, you know, that's when we went back to annual farming, cropping, we immediately went into no-till, so there wasn't much of a transition for us. We had tried conventionally farming and it just didn't work. But we could have no-tilled the annual crops. We could have no-tilled annual crops and we would have improved our soil health, kept the right amount of residue, this and that. But we put cover crops on it and it can accelerate the biological time. This is cover crop 2008. Same kind of mix. Different part of that field. Cover crop 2009. We had put oats for hay in the field, coming off of the cover crop. As soon as the oats and hay was off, we seeded it the next week. She's even happy about it. It's soft in there. It's easy to walk. 2 years old there. Cover crop 2010 after OP, we are a forage-based operation. So predominantly what our crops have been are for forage. So everything is taken for forage. But the point I'm making is you need to keep a continually live root growing at all times. Find the window where the cover crop will work. This is a winter trilicated hairy vetch stand. This is the crop response off of the cover crop. That was what my cows were grazing on, that earlier slide. This is what it turned into. I believe it did about 5 to 6 bales an acre. At 1,350 pound bales or 1,400 pound. We'd never been able to do anything like that. This is one of the same fields that in 2006 we on a wet year we could probably get a bale and a half. We sped up the biological time. With that, I think I'll take any questions now, or obviously.
Yeah, go ahead. If you want to feed, that's fine. We'll have at the end of the day, if you guys have questions, write them down. But at the end of the day, after we do the rainfall simulator, then we'll just open these guys up for questions, and you can answer any questions. Or if you've got something that you want to ask now, then go ahead and present that.
But I'll just stop here. I can smell something. You can tell by looking at me I don't miss many meals. Thank you.